Okay, we are recording.
Welcome, everyone. Well, we are in April already, and I just want to welcome you to spring. And we do have, I need to put this up so I can see everybody. Look at how many new members we have. Oh my gosh, I thought I was going to have to do a second slide. So welcome to Kelly from Wyoming, Kimberly from Montana, Rita from Utah, Katie from Idaho, Colleen from Montana, Beth from California, Marcy from New Jersey, Michelle from Utah, and Kimberly from Idaho. Whew, we are growing. Thank you for joining our High Country. We really, really need you and want you. And let's see here. Let's move on. So, this month is our election month. Every year we have our election where we have our outgoing board and our new board. And this year we did revise the bylaws. The bylaws, mostly what we had to do was we changed the name from PCAI Idaho, Professional Coaching Association, to ICF High Country. So you'll see that that was the major change. And then we did some changes in the formatting and clarity of the bylaws. So what we're going to do is we're going to send out the bylaws to you today and give you an opportunity to review them. And then the election ballot will be sent out on April 16th, all via email. And at that time, you'll see that there is a place in the election ballot to either approve or reject the bylaws. Also, is Todd Hess present yet? Our president-elect?
Yep.
Todd, I know Todd would like to take a few minutes to speak to the ballot.
Yeah, so thank you, Vicki. And so, yes, on the 16th, we'll be sending out a ballot. And we have also, that will be on the ballot, is the new board that will begin in June. And so we have a list of the people who will be staying, as well as the new people that will be coming in to replace those outgoing members of the board. We also have a need still for somebody to take the to fill the marketing and communications chair position. We are currently looking for somebody who is willing to take on that. That is to oversee the social media as well as our website. You get to work with a great website coordinator, Stephanie Rank, who will be serving in that capacity next week. She's been a joy to serve with on the board. And this is something that I have been doing for the last 2 years. I don't know anything about marketing or communication. It's been a great experience for me to learn. And so if that's something that you want to explore and learn about, this is a great opportunity to do so. So if anybody's interested, you can email me at todd168@gmail.com. And if you're interested in that.
Thank you, Todd. Now we have upcoming events. Our book club is still going on, the Good Habits, Bad Habits. And Thursday, April 29th, the Wine and Cheese social event, been very popular. May 5th, something new that you guys have been asking for, membership has put this together, an ICF credentialing orientation. And the panel will have ACC, PCC, and MCC. So you'll have lots of opportunity to speak to all the different credential levels and do Q&A and learn about the process and resources for getting your accreditation. Friday, May 14th, our next program is the Six-Figure Coach, the Fast Path to More Clients, Profit and Impact, Krista Martin. And then we have what we've been working on with Stephanie, International Coaching Week. Stephanie?
Thanks, Vicki. I'm excited to give you guys some more details about ICF Coaching Week, which will be May 17th through the 20th. We're going to have 4 robust discussions along the theme of recalculating opportunities, and you can earn 4 CCEUs that week. So I don't have the topic set to dates yet. I will next week, but please block 12 to 1 p.m. Mountain Time, May 17th through the 20th, so you don't miss out. Just a list of what we're doing. Each day we'll have a different topic. So we'll have life coaching topics with Jenny Heike, Valerie Davis, and Todd Hess. We'll have career coaching with Lisa Hecht, Jennifer Kumar, and myself. Diversity and inclusion topics with Laura Alvarez Schrag, Linda Secretan, and April Townsend. And we'll have a leadership discussion with Jan Bush and Anjali Pai. I am looking for 3 to 4 moderators who can help with the introductions, the chat box, and Q&A during these sessions. So if you're comfortable with handling Zoom, please drop me a chat and I'll put my email in the chat so you can reach out. You would just have to hang out and just help with monitoring some of those questions in the chat box. So thank you again for all of our guest speakers who are here and who are volunteering to share their expertise. And I look forward to seeing you all at ICF Coaching Week, May 17th through the 20th.
Thank you, Stephanie. What is the theme?
Recalculating opportunities.
Nice.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So quickly, the book club is still going. I think we're only on our second meeting, so you're still, you could still probably join. Good habits, bad habits. I don't have any bad habits. I don't know about you guys. And let's see here. Oops, I don't want to go too fast. Be sure to hold the date for June 16th for Humble Inquiry, the gentle art of asking instead of telling with Patricia. And just a quick global news, membership renewal season expired on March 31, but that doesn't mean you still can't join. And please join and support our coaching profession. And earning CCEUs. So to do that, you need to register, which all of you have because you're here. Attend the event from start to finish. That's really important. Complete the program survey after each event. CCEU credits are free for ICF High Country members with completed feedback survey. If you're a non-member or a guest, the fee is $20 to receive a CCEU with a completed feedback survey. So that's really important. And now, introducing our speaker today. I remember meeting Jan Salisbury for the first time in a small reception area in a charming old home in North Boise. Jan invited a group of coaches who were motivated to collaborate and advance our coaching profession. It was actually the first inception for ICF High Country. Jan is the co-founder and past president of the board who took a group of coaches from sharing our experiences to what was the Professional Coaching Association of Idaho to now ICF High Country with 6 states, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. Jan Salisbury is an ICF Master Certified Coach. She is the president of Salisbury Consulting and a founding partner in Leaders Who Coach, a program that develops leaders to be coaches in their roles as they empower and develop others. And if that's not enough, she is also a Visted Chair of Small Business Owners and a key executive peer advisory in the Treasure Valley of Idaho. And as she completes writing her book, Leaders Who Coach, The Coach Approach to Leading, she spends her free time enjoying different cultures, playing on rivers, reading and bicycling with her husband. So welcome, Jan. So happy to have you here today. And I will stop my share.
Okay, let me do this. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Vicki, I do remember that. And I just want to say that both Vicki and Stacy were there from the beginning, and look at them. They're still there and still helping everything. And I think it's just marvelous. We didn't know where this would go, but we're very happy about where it's gone. I think that was our vision. We just didn't know how it would happen. So I'm going to, oops, see here. Here we go. Today, I'm going to talk about a topic that we really don't talk about very much. It's my motivation for doing this is in part, in writing this book, I always like to include research. So I have been keeping an eye out for research about our profession. And in addition, I have some psychological journals from the American Psychological Association, and I've noticed over time that increasingly they have been including experimental research and other kinds of research about coaching. And that's been a relatively new development in the last, I would say 8 years. So I've been noticing this and I thought, well, why not present some of this data? Because I think it's so important that we not forget that when we use the word evidence-based, we want to know whether or not there's really evidence, right? And I can tell you that we're at the beginning, we're in our infancy around research. So as I present this, please know that I didn't do an exhaustive investigation, but I think some of the things that I did find with some help are representative of where the research is right now. So the kinds of questions I'd like to address today is, what is the efficacy of coaching? What do we know? How do we make a difference? What do we do that makes a difference? And how can, and I think this is so important, how can the research inform our own practice? What can we focus on? And finally, what can we do to measure our own effectiveness as a coach? Very, very important. Even if it may not be research ready, it's something that we can do. So I'm going to talk about 3 areas today. I'm going to talk about wellness, and I want to thank Carmen Oldenburg, because I reached out to her and she had these marvelous large studies that have been done around wellness coaching. I never would have been able to find it, honestly. Executive coaching, as well as what happens when leaders coaching. So those are the 3 areas that I'm going to focus on today as we go through this. And I think what you're going to find is that there are similarities, regardless of what you're focusing on in your research. So what I'd like to do is do a poll. And Stacy, if you could put that up. And the poll is really for you to check off what you think has been shown so far. Again, we're in our infancy here, to be effective. So if you would please just check off, you can check off.
Can you see it, Jan?
Yes, I can. Can everybody else see it? Yes? Christina, can you see it? Yes, okay.
Okay, about 54% have voted, so we're just going to allow a few more seconds here.
Yeah, let's allow some more time. Yeah.
We're at 63%, 68.
Okay, a few more.
77.
You got to read through it before you can respond.
We're at 90%, so we're almost all there.
All right, very cool. Let's go ahead and publish the results.
Okay, I'm going to end it and share the results. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
So everybody thought that one of these, at least, contributes to our effectiveness as a coach. I think you'll find all of them in the core competencies. One of the other reasons why I wanted to present this data is because I've been doing more and more mentor coaching for people who are moving on in their accreditation. And I'm really thinking about and observing both video and audio, what people are doing, and myself noticing what's effective and how that does or doesn't correlate with the core competencies. Isn't it interesting that presence is number 1? And it is the most difficult to measure. You're not going to be hearing a lot of things about presence today. It's very hard to measure that. It doesn't mean it's not folded into the other areas, but it's tough. And you're going to find most of that occurring around the trust issue. So what I'd like to do, and by the way, if you have any comments, please go to the chat area and make them. And can you, Stacy, if something comes up, can you let me know?
I will.
Yeah, just comments or anything else you want to share there? And we'll come back to this.
Do you want
Thank
me to stop sharing?
Please, yes. Interesting. Okay. So have you stopped sharing? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm going to admit somebody here. All righty. So there are some challenges regarding research in this area, and they're the same challenges that you find when you look at the research on therapy or counseling. It's just very difficult. And it's also, if you're going to do it very well, it's also very expensive. So most of this you're going to find happening either from places like Google for leadership, or you're going to find it happening from academics. And also because they have the measurements that are most related to some of the outcomes that we want to look at around coaching. But I think what's really true is that it's all limited by that. It's limited by what we can measure. It's limited by whether or not we have a controlled studies. And some of these, we do have controlled studies. Let's say you assign people to one area and then you have a control group that doesn't get coaching, right? Now that doesn't mean that as a result, coaching does these things, but at least it's some kind of control that we have over the situation. I think the measuring of outcomes is the most difficult, but people have been really creative. They've looked at videotaping, audio taping, having raters listen or observe sessions and being able to go through and make determinations about what's going on. They have what we call Q sorts, and the Q sorts are really giving people some qualities or sentences and having them sort through what has happened for them or what's most true for them. And in that, you're going to be seeing differences between coaches and coachees. I think that's very interesting. You know, what we think really works and what they think works, they're not always the same. It doesn't mean that both aren't actually valid, but it is interesting to not assume that your clients are actually having the same perceptions that you are. And I guess one of the questions I had is how many of these actually focus on core competencies? I was surprised that a lot of them did, even though there wasn't one study that actually talked about the ICF core competencies, not one study. Isn't that interesting? And even ICF and the research that they're doing, it's mostly around executive coaching, and in particular coaching cultures. And then the other challenge that we have in research is replicating. Do we have anybody doing the same kind of study with the same kinds of people? And the answer to that is no. Although we have enough happening at this point that we can actually see some themes. So these are all some of the ways that we have to think about research when we are looking at some of this data. So the first area that I'd like to talk about is really wellness. Now, wellness is really interesting, and I'm curious, maybe people can raise a hand and you can see how many in our group are wellness coaches. You can
Hey, honey.
Go ahead and raise a hand. Do you see, Stacy?
I don't see any hands raised right now.
Okay, but I know some of you are out there.
Good. I'm doing my Zoom meeting right now.
Oh, okay. All right. So what's interesting about the wellness research is that it is done by folks who have the money and they have the ability to have controlled research situations and studies. The inherent problem is that once again, those of us that are ICF certified, what you're going to be looking for is how did these people get trained? And indeed, they did get trained in a very specific way to coach. And so some of this you're going to hear as being very different than it is for those of us in private practice, for instance. But again, the themes are pretty clear. So in this particular program, and there's a lot of data in this program. It's the VA, they have lots of people, lots of ability to control some of the conditions. So here's what's interesting. they had different kinds of people coaching. They had lay health people, they had professional health science people, students, they had behavioral health provider. And in that way, they were actually able to measure the differences between them. This coaching sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's patient-centered, it's client-determined goals, and it's self-discovery. And what's really interesting is that the behavioral health providers had the largest impact. Now that doesn't surprise me because they also had a lot of background about people and all of that related to people's health and their attitudes about it and their values about it. So there were significant positive results when they compared them with control groups. The amount of physical activity, their weight, their medication, and finally their self-efficacy. You're going to hear the theme of self-efficacy again and again in this research, and I find it exciting. That is people being confident about their ability to be successful, about their ability to reach goals. And I happen to think that's one of the things we do in coaching very well. People aren't sure, they aren't confident, and they come into coaching. And if we do our job well, they're going to leave with a sense of, I can do this, because they have been doing it. And our greatest wish, I think, is that they leave our coaching and they continue to do it. So this is a theme, no matter what kind of coaching we're talking about. And again, if you have any questions, raise your hand, or Stacy, go ahead and let me know what you see in the chat session, okay?
I'll do that.
All right, yeah, questions are good. And then we have the Mayo Clinic Wellness Effectiveness. Now, this is a very interesting study because they did 100 employees. And this was, the trained coaches were trained in strengths, goals, ethics, trust, creating all of that. Depending upon where they were in the coaching, they had 60 to 120 minutes. I think they started with 120 minutes. And they really were looking at psychological issues, which I find very interesting. I think that's very hard to have that kind of impact. There was, and again, we're looking at pretty standardized assessments. When you get into the mental health area, you're able to have these standardized assessments for depression and those kinds of things. And what they found is that there was improvement in all of the areas that they were measuring. And it did result in successful mood management. Now, keep in mind, these weren't people coming into a mental health center. These are employees, right? And people often ask me, what's the difference between life coaching and executive coaching and so on and so forth? And my answer to that is everything is life coaching. There isn't a kind of coaching that we do that isn't about the person and their lives. It's all in that context. And that's my opinion, but I think it's really true. There was a significant correlation between ratings of coaching skills and self-reported. So in other words, the person doing the coaching, there was a rating by the client about their skills, and also the coach reported. So there was a correlation there. And I really found this very helpful. The health wellness yield a very positive impact on chronic lifestyle illness. And to me, this is huge. It's a huge opportunity for the wellness area to really be working on people's lifestyle, because we know what that contributes to people's illness. So if you look at this research, and by the way, if you do have a question, I do have a more detailed description of the research here, but we're talking about really a focused conversation about these things. So it's not really getting off on things. They had 12 weeks, which actually is a pretty long time, but they were focused on these indices at affecting them. And that's also a theme you're going to hear throughout all of the coaching. So,
Jan?
Yeah.
Kent said that the first step of leadership development is personal development.
Yes, I agree completely. We like to say in my Vistage groups, you can't, the organization doesn't grow beyond the boundaries of the leader, right? So if once the leader begins to expand those boundaries and also focuses on a flourishing life, the business always benefits from that. I think the United States is slowly changing how it's looking at that. One of the things that's interesting about this this area of wellness coaching, I didn't see a lot of research in other countries. And I do want to let you know that other countries are ahead of us in coaching, many of them, in particular England. You're going to find that a lot of the team coaching thought leaders and some of that research is actually being done from England. So I think we're just playing catch up at this point. And I'm going to give a little aside. I think because I have done a lot of research with people in universities, I don't think they know what coaching is. And it's really hard to do research if you don't know about it or you haven't experienced it, I think, in this case. It doesn't really rise to that level. And it may also be that there isn't money coming down the pike in grants for those people. Yet, as when we get to the executive coaching research, we really find that it has an impact on engagement. And that is part of the research that's being funded.
Jan,
Yes.
we had a question from Lisa Hecht, and she said, how important is the length of coaching? It takes 60 to 90 days typically to form a habit.
That's a really good question. I would say this is probably the most in-depth research that I've seen in wellness. But again, these are summary articles. They're summarizing a lot of different things. This is a particular one. That's a good question. I'm not sure they're paying attention to that yet, frankly. And there are a number of really interesting research pieces that are just looking at a tiny behavior. And in those, they're really not looking at it over a period of time. So great question. Thank you. All right. So this is interesting. I really like this research because what they did is they looked at 20 actually experienced coaches. They had 20, well, actually didn't look at 20. They had 20 years or more. Now they only looked at 6 coaches, but what they were doing is they were actually recording them and videotaping them. And then they had other experienced coaches review the tape. And these are the typologies that they came up with. Now, the reason they did this research is because, again, in the research, they're actually not focused as much on the kind of coaching beyond executive coaching or wellness coaching. And this kind of leads us to really have the conversation. And I think it is tied to core competencies at the ICF as to what kind of coaching is going on. So I just want to briefly go through this. They didn't do any other research except this. And their purpose was, hey, if we can identify these things, then we can go out and find out what the impact is. So I found it really fascinating. So the client-led coaching is really, it's relationship oriented and an inquiry, but it's not in depth. They described it as someone going through more of a process without some of the emotional things that go on sometimes in coaching. So it's really more of a practical kind of coaching. We're going to focus on this goal, and here's the outcome that we want, right? And then we get into process-led coaching. And the process-led coaching they described as the coach orchestrating a structured process. But again, it's absent of the depth offered solutions and the needs of the client are really overlooked. It's almost like in describing this, the coach is going through a process, but isn't paying a lot of attention to the client. Now, remember, you have experienced coaches and you have experienced coaches that are actually looking at these videos and rating these different kinds of interactions that are occurring. And then you get to the kind that we know has been going on for a long time. And I'm happy to say it's less like this because there's so much research on how the performance management process is not successful in organizations. And that's what our program Leaders Who Coach is doing. It's really giving them another alternative to help with performance improvement. But this is very impersonal. It's more instructional. It's third-party led, and the organization has control over it. So you might include in that actually training sometimes. We're going to teach you how to do this. We're going to be clear about our expectations. And your particular needs are not important. It's the organizational needs that are up front. And finally, we have the dialogic kind of coaching, and this is what they refer to as more transformative. There's, in other words, the client is the focus, and the goals and what happens is more an emergent process. I'm not saying there isn't clear process, but it's more emergent. In other words, the client really is more in control of that. And the people watching didn't get a sense that the coach was marching down a path, right? There was more of a sense that the coaching was listening very carefully. And as a result of that and some of the coaching that was going on, the path emerged, which I found very interesting. So there's really not anything here to tell you what's more effective, but at least we're trying to get a sense of what are the different kinds of coaching here when we look at it. My guess is, for instance, that process-led coaching is in some cases more about, for instance, in the wellness coaching area. And I'm not saying they don't get into some of the other stuff. What I'm mostly interested in is the differences between client-led coaching and dialogic coaching. My guess is, having gone through the MCC, I think they're looking in the MCC much more for dialogic coaching that actually does reflect some of those core competencies. That's the sense I got. Yeah, Stacy?
Sarah, who is calling in from England, had a comment, and she said perhaps one difference between the client-led and dialogic coaching would be that the client-led might stay in the comfort zone, whereas in the dialogic coaching, the client may experience usual discomfort.
I think that's right on. As I was saying, the English are ahead of us. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right on. I personally believe that there's no learning.
Could I just say it was useful discomfort?
Yes, useful. Yes,
sorry.
Yeah, so the idea that
Yeah.
discomfort not for the sake of it, but really productive.
And let me add to that I don't think there's learning without discomfort, because there's nothing changing, right? There's nothing changing there. So you're at about, what, 8 o'clock there in England? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for joining us. Yeah. So again, very interesting. It's empirically derived. I think it's a good beginning, and I think there's more work that's needed here.
And then we had some more questions too.
Sure.
Christina is asking, process-based typology, which source is this? Whose model is it?
Well, it's not a model. It's empirical. So in other words, these types came out of actually looking at videotapes of these experienced coaches, and they came up with these 4 categories that seem to emerge from that data. So it's not a theoretical model. It's an empirically based model. I don't know if there's a follow-up to that, but
and then Todd asks, which typology is deeper exploration? I'm surprised that process-led isn't deep.
Well, I think what's hard when you're looking at research is to look at these categories and realize that they are operationally defining them. In other words, our definition of process-led may be exactly that, right? There is in-depth because we're process-oriented. But in this particular definition, there was a group of coaches who were actually didn't have in-depth exploration. And the coach, and this is super important in this definition, was visibly leading the process. It's that leading the process that I think is, you'll see a difference between the 2 on the right and the 2 on the left, the client-led and the dialogic. So we kind of just have to look at their definition, I think.
And Sarah is saying MCC coaching is dialogic coaching. I have been an MCC assessor over the years and definitely recognize the dialogic as the closest to what we look for at the MCC level.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. It certainly, when I went through that, it certainly was what my coach helped me to really work on. Although Actually, some of the areas that I had to work on weren't that. There were some other areas. Everybody has their weaknesses, right? But it did make me go back to basics, which I think has been very good for me. Yeah, great questions. Anything
Well,
else?
and Christina had a follow-up question
Yeah.
on who is the author and who did the empirical study.
Yeah. All righty. And I can also send this out.
And she's talking about the process-based typology.
Well, see, it all came from the same research. There wasn't a separate study. This is only from one study. So what happens in research is that people pioneer a field, and then what they're hopeful is that people will take these categories and begin to do some other research on them. So this was one. This is a 2018 study, and I'm happy to send that stuff out to people if they want to go after that.
And you're going to share your slides, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Some of these, I've only been able to get. It's hard to get hold of articles in psychological journals without paying for them, unless you're a member of the APA, which I am. So some of this I'm getting from a journal that I'm actually able to get as a result of that membership. But it's tough. What you get usually are just some summaries. You don't get the details. Yeah, good questions. Thank you. Anything else?
And Brenda says this is great research.
Yeah, it's a beginning. It's a beginning. So I really like this research. So what they did was they looked at these different kinds of interventions. Now, the reason I like this is because as an executive coach and somebody who's working with in the workplace all the time, people are always talking, we'll just stick them in training, right? And by and large, the research from most training is that you might come back with about 10 or 15% of the knowledge. And we're really not sure if you're going to come back with anything you're going to change. Because as Lisa said, it takes a while to change things. And unless you're coming back to a workplace where that's being reinforced and all of those kinds of things, it's not very likely that that's going to have much of an impact. So they were looking at these kinds of outcomes: goal attainment, knowledge, motivation, which was self-rated, and it was regarding procrastination. It's not procrastination to coach. Sorry. I don't know why I have two in there. So they were looking at self-coaching, where they just gave people some instruction, asked them to create some goals, and then they measured how they did later on. And then they gave them something to read. The group training was actually sitting down with a group of people and getting knowledge about procrastination. And the executive coaching was actually spending time with the person coaching regarding procrastination. And again, they have measurements about these kinds of issues. So what I thought was really interesting is that the self-coaching had the same effectiveness for goal setting. So people are able to set goals, right, themselves. And in the group training, again, it enhanced their knowledge. But the personal goals that people set were the same as individual coaching. However, when you got to the coaching intervention, significantly more positive goals, problem solving, more intrinsic motivation, more ability to deal with change. So we're looking at a measurement that actually is looking at different interventions. I think this is the only one that I found like that. Now, what's interesting, the second thing that happens in coaching, and I see it in a number of studies, is there's what we call mirroring of coaches and coachees, that should be coachees, behavior during the process. And this research has actually been there for decades. For instance, in the counseling literature, you could actually look at videotapes and see that after a while, the communication skills that the counselor was using was being mirrored by the client. That just goes back to Albert Bandura's research around modeling. And I wonder if it's something that as coaches, we don't pay attention to as much. That not only are we helping that person on the path that they've chosen, but there is some clear modeling going on of how we do things, how we approach things, how we talk about things. And you're really going to find this a lot in this research. It keeps coming up in different ways in all the different kinds of research. And sometimes I forget it. my clients tell me, and I'm like, oh, okay. I kind of look at it as an added bonus, but it really isn't. It's part of what happens in coaching. Questions or comments about that?
Kent is sharing a motivational chart. Do you want to come on off mute, Kent, and
Sure.
explain what you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's just a picture I took from a book called Self-Determination Theory by Edward Ryan. Edward Ryan teach. My mind just went
That's okay.
blank for a second. But the reason I saved it is I saw the intrinsic motivation, I saw the procrastination, I saw the motivation, and one thing that in reading the book that they've done a lot of studies as far as in the book they go over studies that they've done over sports teams, jobs, therapy, and the with the main focus being on what motivates people, right?
Exactly.
So what they did is they made a chart on how you're going to where you're going to receive the most, the highest level of motivation, and where the lowest is, right? And one of the things that they outline in the book is, in order for something to be intrinsically motivated, it has to be a holistic representation of ourselves, or
Absolutely.
that we've internalized to a point where this is, this represent who I am in a holistic, but majority of people fall into the introjected values where I need to get better because my boss tells me I need to get better. I need to get better because my wife says I need to get better. I need to get, instead of these needs of these extrinsic perceived locus of causalities, now I'm interjecting these beliefs and I'm not going to give my best effort, but I'm just going to give just enough to get by. Whereas if I learn how to internalize and check what I'm trying to do against myself and my values and what I like and what is important to me, and if I as a leader want to help somebody on the same way, if I want to help you improve, I want to make sure that everything moving forward is autonomous in you deciding to come to me. You feel supported, so you have your relatedness covered, and then, like you said, self-efficacious. You have to feel a little competent but challenged. So those three areas, focus on those, and boom. Anyway, sorry, slight tangent.
No, Kent, I just think that's brilliant. I think it's super important, and the whole client focus. And if you go back to the slide before, right? If you look at the process-led, how they define it, right? The description of that is it's not client focused. The coach, it's almost like there's a formula, right? And this is what's hard when we're teaching coaching, and I've been doing that for a long time now, at least a decade, is to help people begin to integrate it with themselves, coaching. And part of it is you've got to be focused on the other person. And you've got to help them discover all these things that you're talking about. What do I value? Where am I going? What's important to me? And it's different for different people, right? That's what you're saying. So thank you for that. Very important.
We also had a comment from Lisa. She said, I've heard of research that indicates our health is deeply influenced by those of our closest relationships. Might that be a part of the modeling success you described? Is
Yes.
that a function?
Yeah.
I have to scroll down a little bit. Is that a function of the closeness trust of the coaching relationship?
Yeah, I would think so. It's interesting. I was just thinking about this. I'm very careful in my coaching. I mean, I do share, and I'm willing to be vulnerable about some things, because I'm pretty effective around exercise and things like that. I'm really careful not to share that for obvious reasons, but to share the places I have struggles, if it's appropriate. But I think regardless, there is modeling going on all the time. There's no question. I mean, I think what Albert Bandura did is he said, look, it's beyond operant conditioning, reinforcement and rewards, right? there's somebody there, and our brains, if you know anything about mirror neurons, are actually wired, we think, there's all this research, to actually have our neurons fire the same way as somebody else when there's a significant event going on. So there's a lot of brain connection here going on. And again, we're just trying to understand what it means and what's really happening. Anything else?
Kent says the limbic system is an open loop system that connects together.
Yes, very much so. Okay. Okay, let's move into executive coaching. This particular study in 2019, 101 articles. So they're trying to summarize a lot of data. I love that, because otherwise I couldn't have known all this. Again, what they're using is recordings and descriptions. They're interviewing clients. They're looking at how the coaches reflect on their own performance, the extent to which there's perceived empathy by the client. They're looking at trust, commitment to coaching, the coaching contract, and self-efficacy. Those are the outcomes that they're looking at. And they're really summarizing this across all these studies. So it's more of a macro kind of research piece. And this is my little chart for self-efficacy. Here's what they found. I mean, self-efficacy, again, is very important. The person begins to have confidence in their ability to change and their ability to perform, or their ability to reach their goal. Now I've starred some things because these are the things where you had really significant results. And it really reminds me of some of the things that I think most of us do. To what extent is the person actually receptive to coaching? I have a whole thing, and we teach it to our leaders. Who's ready to be coached, right? And without making a judgment, I'm very careful about the executives that I take when there's been a problem at work, because if they're not open to coaching, I don't want people to waste their money. And how you check that out is interesting. I recently had somebody that I really went through a lot with the leader about whether or not they were appropriate for coaching. And we kind of went through it. And I have to tell you, this is one of the best coaching clients I've ever had. But I didn't know based on some of the behaviors that were being reported. Here's another one that's really significant. Is there agreement on the goals and tasks? Is there agreement? Because that's all related to whether or not there's attainment of the goal. So if the coach has a different idea than the coachee, we have a problem. So as I'm sure most of you do, is that you don't necessarily accept what the goals are in the beginning, because they change. As the person begins to discover more about who they are, they change. And that's, so when we say goals, it's really, when is that? When do we really settle on some goals? And I actually have a habit, and I know most coaches don't do this, but I have a habit of actually sending my folks an email. I'm very clear that they have to keep track of their own action steps, but it's a way for me to check on whether or not we're actually aligned on some things. And it works really well for me. And quite honestly, I started it when I had a bad bike accident. I had a concussion and I couldn't remember anything. And I couldn't learn some things. It really was really very hard. And so I thought, boy, I better keep track of this stuff, because I'm not going to be able to remember. But it stuck with me. So it's something, it was a gift of my bike accident. What is their commitment to coaching? And that's kind of related to receptiveness of coaching. Some of the outcomes is people, they were able to report new awareness, insight, empathy. Now, this is interesting. The coachee reported more empathy than the coach. I'm wondering what people think that's about.
And we do have some questions too, if you want to take some questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. Georgia says, are you willing to share how you determine readiness to be coached, especially when a sponsor is selecting employees to be coached?
I have a list of things that in my coaching executive contract that I list out that are the coachee's responsibility. For instance, that they come with goals, that they're willing to follow up and do action steps that they have chosen, that they're willing to give me feedback. So I have a whole list of those. And I actually got them from the College of Executive Coaching that I went to 14 years ago. And what I do is I go through that with the sponsor. And with this particular person, he was unclear whether or not it would work. We both were unclear, but it was worth it to invest because the person had gotten feedback from the other person in his position, but it wasn't very good feedback and they'd never given her support to change. So the idea was we really didn't know if she could. And once she had that commitment, I've never seen anybody go after it as much as she did. And in the past, I have had people, and I'm sure you have too, that were referred that I really, in hindsight, thought that that was not a good referral. They just weren't ready for it. So it really has to do with all of that. And so I actually have a conversation with the coachee ahead of time before I even take the contract and make it clear. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. And Lisa is asking where you're finding the research reports because she's interested in finding some for career coaching.
You know, I have to say I'm finding it all over the place. I did not find any for career coaching. So I'm not saying it's not out there. It probably is, but it's probably in a special area. It's probably in some special journals that I don't get. So there's nowadays you can go out on the web and you can actually seek out some of this research, some of this hardcore research, I think. However, regardless of that, there are such similarities in these research results that I think inform all of our coaching, regardless of the specialty area that we have. It's kind of like Kent was talking about the motivation. I mean, you're right. If, you know, I'm a person that's played a lot of sports. If you don't get at that internal motivation, you're not going to really help somebody get better, are you? It's not going to happen. And the best coaches do that. Absolutely, the best coaches do that. The last thing here was working alliance, and that refers to that relationship. And you're also going to see that a lot in the research, is that there's a working alliance. There's a trust. I think there's a, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use the word attraction, but there's a sense of not only does this person have my back, but there's actually a sense of liking each other. And I think it happens often in coaching. And if I have somebody that I feel that's not happening with, unless that changes, I don't think the coaching is going to work. Doesn't happen very often, but I think it does happen. The barriers, on the other hand, that they identified in all these research studies is lack of trust, lack of agreement on goals, and lack of transfer to the workplace. And isn't this interesting? Sexism. It just came up in the research. My guess is you could also add racism to that. If you have a sense that somebody is steering you in a way or they're responding to you in a way that's stereotypic, then you're likely to get that as well. Anything else coming up, Stacy?
Yes, Lisa's asking, please say more about how you use the emails to track goal task attainment. I use it to affirm as opposed to using it to track. But I'll talk about that in the end, about ways that we can do this as individual practitioners. So I use it to track only in the sense that I have a record and they have a record. But again, it's their responsibility to write down whatever it is that makes sense to them, whatever insight they have or their goals or their action steps. Okay. And she's saying, or agreement on the goals.
Or agreement on the goals. The agreement on the goals is very important for me. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have another question here. Sarah saying, would you say more about how specifically you structure and use your goal tracking ratification emails? And maybe you already answered that.
Yeah, I think I did. But we'll talk about that more at the end. Yeah.
Okay, and then Georgia, in reference to an increased empathy, I think when a person is well coached, they gain tremendous insight into themselves, leading to increased empathy for self and others.
I agree, and I'm going to talk about that research in just a moment. Yeah, absolutely. But the research on empathy is complicated too, so we'll talk about that. Here is just some research that popped out. It's not one of these big mega studies. This was interesting because they were actually looking, they're starting to look at functional MRIs. Now, of course, when you do that, you're not going to do that in a regular coaching session. You're going to do that in a very controlled, it's very expensive, controlled situation. And what they did was in this first study is that they actually trained people to coach, and they had two conditions. One is making it problem focused. In other words, what's the issue, what's the problem, and focusing on solving it. Versus somebody talking about, where do you want to go? Right? What's your goal? What's your vision about what you want this to be? I found this very fascinating because I think this is part of the essence of coaching, that we are not just about problems. We are about where we're going. We are about the possibilities that people have. And it turns out, just in this small study where they met a couple of times, when the person focused on challenges and problem-centered, it encouraged stress and self-conscious thoughts. Isn't that interesting? And for me, it's almost like they're saying, hey, if you do that without doing the other part, it's not going to be very helpful. One of my goals in our Leaders Who Coach program is to really teach leaders not to do that, but to help them understand how important it is to do this other part. It's lovely to have this research to now present to them. And the ideal vision, there's more inspiration, more trust, more caring. And when they looked at the fMRIs, there's more lighting up of parts of the brain that they feel are social. So the other thing that's going on is this connection that people have in that ideal vision is very positive, which affects people. So again, this is pretty short term, but I think it's kind of interesting. Again, if the alliance is good between the coachee, it affects achieving goals and action steps. Now, the why of that, I think, is pretty complicated. Is the person trying to please the coach? Perhaps that's happening sometimes. If there's a sense of somebody has my back, they're supporting me through this, so I can do it, and that's self-efficacy. And finally, once again, you're seeing in study after study that the interpersonal behavior between the coach and the coachees is mirrored. And I know that sometimes what happens is that the coachee will start off talking about issues in a certain way, but over a period of time with coaching, they change the way they talk about those issues. And I'll give you one very small example. I'm one of those people that when people start talking about you and they, I encourage them to talk about I, right? And I notice after a while that they just start getting into it. And they kind of smile and they get into it because then they feel it and then they own it. Because it's really, coaching is not about people out there, it's about the person, right? Okay.
We had a comment from Lisa. Some of this empathy reminds me of Kristen Neff's mindful self-compassion, which ironically enables learning and self-efficacy. Would this make sense in explaining some of the research results?
I don't know. It's a good hypothesis. It's a really good hypothesis.
And then Vicky is saying John Boydie-Tallis, that's probably butchering his name, is doing ongoing studies on positive emotional attractors, personal vision, versus negative emotional attractors, problem-centered.
Right. So it sounds like for Vicky, that's affirming what I just said.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's always cool when they don't contradict each other, right? You're like, well, what do I believe, right? Yeah. So this is really interesting. Empathy is so important, and it's complicated. It's complicated because I think sometimes we believe that empathy is feeling the other person's pain, and it's not. It doesn't mean we don't feel it sometimes, but when we get into that, it's called empathetic distress. We get into feeling it, and And in some cases, I think this is sort of tangential research as opposed to direct research around coaching. But the empathetic distress is this need to join with the person in such a way that it sometimes can take away our ability to coach and to be that objective person that's helping the person get through that. I think it's super important to distinguish between them. And obviously there are times at which it happens. I think what happens in coaching is more the concern and perspective taking, right? I'm concerned and I can see your perspective. I can feed that back to you by listening actively to you. And you can hear yourself, right? The pro-social engagement is just when people are reaching out with the intention to help and support somebody. So it's less specific. But here's some of the other interesting parts. People feel less distress and empathy for those who are in an out group. Our ability to feel empathy for people who are different than us can be very limited. We have to work very hard at that. And I think everybody can see the application for that in terms of what's going on now. But at least to remember that's a research finding, and it's not necessarily, it's something we have to be aware of, I think. And as somebody else said, taking another's perspective increases the awareness of others and appreciation. I think that's something we do actively in coaching. We ask people to take the perspective of others. Hey, if you were that person in your team, how might you be looking at this? I mean, it's a very powerful intervention. How might you be feeling? You're not asking them to agree. You're asking them to take that different perspective to get them out of seeing it with blinders. You're asking them to open up the possibilities. And of course, we know that empathy is contagious. When people learn, my experience with most of the leaders I know that are having trouble with empathy, it's not that they don't feel it, they just don't know how to express it. That's my experience. So that's actually pretty easy. If they weren't feeling it, I'm not sure I could do anything with that. But because they're feeling it, they just never learn to express it. And that would be more true of men than women, by the way. Once they get it, they're pretty powerful sometimes. And finally, and this is really cool, when they looked at, this is an experimental study, when they looked at somebody expressing empathy actively, in other words, they were paraphrasing back what they thought the person was feeling and thinking, versus somebody who, was just feeling empathetic, the client was really clear. It's when people actively empathize that they judge the person to be more empathetic. I know that sounds really obvious, but I think sometimes we get into feeling like, well, we're communicating all this, and we're not. So it's very important to really focus on communicating that. Anything coming up there, Stacy?
Oh, we have a lot.
Oh gosh, okay.
Lisa is saying in Daniel Goleman's book, he talks about cognitive empathy, top down,
Right.
emotional, bottom up empathy, and the empathy that engages.
Yeah, I think it's very similar, but I actually like these terms better myself in terms of how they're doing research with it. It makes more sense to me. And from a teaching, coaching perspective, it's easier to help people learning to coach to really understand what the behaviors are here.
And Kent is asking if he could add something on empathy.
Sure, of course, Kent. Go for it.
So I just wanted to kind of maybe elaborate a little further on Lisa's comment. And then also, if anybody's interested in improving empathy, I know a good book that actually works very well for that. So Lisa talks about Daniel Goleman's 3 different aspects of empathy. Cognitive empathy, I have to understand what you're thinking and why you're thinking it. Emotional empathy, I see your emotion, I see you're feeling an emotion, I see your some sort of emotional reaction. That's the easiest form of empathy. I see somebody's angry, you're mad, boom, it's easy. They're mad. I can recognize that easier. Now to go from emotional empathy to cognitive empathy is kind of the next step. I can see you're mad, but why are you mad? I need to understand your thought process as to what made you mad. And then from there, I can do the next level, which he says is compassionate empathy, which moves me to express my empathy towards you. And one thing I wanted to differentiate, because there's a difference between active listening and empathic listening. Okay. Active listening, you're just repeating back what they're saying. Empathic listening, you're showing their emotion, you're recognizing their emotion. And the thing that I struggle with is, I got this from Stephen Covey's book and other things, is putting my personal spin on their situation. I don't know exactly what they're going through. I can't really understand fully because I'm not in their minds. I can only assume, and I can only take, the instance and be like, Jan, I know that looks like that would make you very mad. And, if I was in your position, I don't know how I would react, but I could see why you're mad. That's very, you have a very justified reason to be angry. So I'm taking your emotion, you're showing it to me, I'm reflecting it to you. I may not understand, but I'm inviting you to see that I understand, I recognize, and then you're going to tell me more reasons why you're mad. And then we're going to talk through it. And then as far as working on empathy, like I said, the first part is emotional empathy. You have to be able to recognize emotions. And with that, you have a micro emotional expression and macro emotional expression. So a great book to look at the differences and be able to see all of these is Paul Ekman's book. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It actually has pictures. I'm trying to think of the exact name.
Could you just put that in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put that in the
That
chat.
would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments.
And
Yeah.
it's got little
Yeah.
practice pictures that you can actually gauge and practice yourself as far as recognizing different emotions.
Yeah, please share that in the chat. That would be great.
Okay.
I think the other part of empathy is self-empathy. Being able to reflect on understanding oneself and one's feelings, and part of this, of course, is acceptance. We're communicating acceptance of what people are feeling as well. The other part of emotional intelligence, of course, is you name it, you tame it. So being able to help people put labels on what they're feeling so that that part of the brain, the frontal cortex, gets engaged in, as Ken's saying, really looking at what does that mean to you? Because in the end, it's about what it means to you. It's data. So why would we cut out important data? I love this stuff on empathy, and I hope that people are going to continue to do research on it, because it's super important. I just want to put it aside because we also can learn from other disciplines. There's a person who I think he won the Nobel Prize. He's a psychologist who does research on violence, and he came to BSU, and his research shows, I know we don't feel this way, that violence has actually significantly decreased over time. We just are more informed about it, apparently. But the thing in the 19th century that really turned the corner was novels. That when people read novels, they were then able to take the perspective of others that they never had met and didn't know, and who are in different circumstances. Isn't that fascinating? I've always wanted to do a leadership program that was about novels. I just thought that would be really cool to do. Just an interesting aside for people. So a couple of other, so now I want to talk a little bit about strength-based coaching and what the research is saying there. I think it's a core part of coaching, and strengths-based perspective comes from Martin Seligman, who really started the positive psychology movement. He used to do really nasty research on learned helplessness with dogs. I don't need to describe that for you. And then he decided, hey, we need to focus on what's positive, and let's look at the research that's telling us what we can use that we're being successful at, as opposed to always looking at, what happens when people are neurotic, or, or the experiments that were done that showed that people had this other side of them. The main issue around strength coaching is that the idea that focusing on deficits is not motivational. It doesn't, and it's so ingrained in our culture. I mean, you give somebody an assessment, what's the first thing they do? They look at what they don't do well in, right? They don't look at the top stuff. They look at what the bottom, and this is cultural, I think, although I'm not sure about the other cultures and how they do this as much. And there's lots of criticism that if you focus so much on strengths, how are you helping people improve? So there's a lot of feedback on this, and a lot of the, I would say they're empirically based strengths assessments are not, don't measure skill. So you have to be very careful about using them because they're really not about what a person can do, right? They're more about what a person can, let me just look at this. I think I have, no, I didn't include that, sorry. Oop, how'd that happen? Okay, here we go. Okay. So the definition of strengths is really about something that gives you energy back. It's a way of being, it's a character. It's not about what you do well. There are lots of things that we do well. They're not strengths according to the kind of strengths definition that we use in coaching, right? So strengths are something that it's your sweet spot. And when you're in your sweet spot, you're motivated, it gives you energy back. It's super important for dealing with stress. So I went to look at the research in two areas. One was in the Gallup area and also in the VIA, which I use a lot of, the values in action. And by the way, the nice thing about the VIA is you don't have to be certified. You do have to learn about it. I have a few books, but you don't have to be certified. And there's a lot of face validity that you get with that. So here's what's interesting about some of these studies with strengths. One is that with the Gallup strengths, they did a study where they had people coach to the 5 top strengths versus the 34 strengths. And they actually used certified strength coaches. And they measured engagement. And by the way, this is a typical question that comes from the engagement research. This is pretty hardcore research. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best, right? What I do best. And what they found is that it's when people had an opportunity, and this goes back to Lisa's comment about having more time to really talk about things. If you just review the top 5, which happens so often on teams, it doesn't have as much of an effect. But if you have someone sit down with you and really look at all 34 strengths with the idea that the ones that are not as strong for you, what does that mean? And is there any there that you would like to get better at? And that's one of the ways that you can use Gallup in any strength assessment to manage lesser strengths, right? How do I use the strengths that are high to actually help me with the strengths I'd like to develop down here? Apparently, looking at all 35 enables more open and constructive relationships, and it focuses on strengths. It reduces stress, it builds hope, self-efficacy, appreciation, understanding of others. One of the lovely things about doing a strength assessment, if you do it well in a team, is that people then begin to understand and not judge others. Oh, I get it. That's how you come across. Now I get it. This is what's strong for you. So that, to me, that was very interesting to read that mega study by Gallup. Anything coming out of that, Stacy?
Lisa's saying, I only know of 24 strengths. Did that change or is that a typo? Or are you talking about?
No, it's not a typo. That comes from this research. Okay. I don't know. I'm not a Gallup person. I've used it a few times, but I can't tell you, but it is 34.
Okay, because she's saying VIA has 24.
Right, no, it's 34.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kent says it's 34 in Clifton Strengths Finder.
It's Clifton, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the difference, yeah.
Okay, and then going back, Zora said that, or Sarah, Stephen Pickner wrote about the decline of
Stephen
violence.
Pickner, right.
Yeah.
Pickerton? Yeah, that's the person, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. No, he's a really great opportunity to see him and to learn that about novels. I just find that fascinating. And you know what's interesting is that don't actually read a lot of novels. maybe they don't have the time, but it's very interesting.
And Lisa's saying that VIA Strengths has helped her in her coaching raise the self-efficacy in her clients.
I use it all the time. I'm finding that increasingly it has more depth. And this is part of the research on the VIA. And if you haven't looked at it, please check it out. And what they studied was more what we might call transformational leadership. And the transformational leadership, I want to read you that definition because it's really important, is the process whereby leaders engage and influence their followers toward attaining a shared vision through their capacity to inspire, innovate, and personalize their attention. And they measured this in terms of 360-degree feedback. It was 37 executives and senior managers that were assigned to either a coaching or a waitlist cohort. They received 6 sessions of leadership coaching, including feedback on their leadership strengths, goal setting, and strength development. So it's an interesting, and the term is strength in coach. It's a capitalization model, right? We're learning to capitalize on things, and it's superior to remediating different deficiencies. It's not that we don't talk about those, but we talk about them in the context of the whole person. And I think that's part of what goes on here. And this was, sorry for the typo, and looking at, there was a very brief VIA strength intervention, and they find that people, there was a significant increase in thriving 1 week after the intervention and decrease in negative emotions 3 months after the intervention. So if you go to the VIA site, you're going to see a lot of research that you can pick up on. The VIA was in fact part of Martin Seligman's, and they spent about 10 years going throughout the world, really looking at these character strengths across cultures. It took a lot of time and a lot of metrics. So it seems like it's very simple, but if you look at how they develop it, I think it's very well done. And most importantly, there's just so much face validity. And by face validity, people look at this and they go, oh my God, that is me. And they'll say things like, I didn't realize it. So I did this with 3 classes that I was doing a whole day thing on for an organization. So, about 100 people. And what was interesting is how many people, I'm sure the organization didn't want this to happen, said to me, now I know I'm so unhappy. I'm really not able to use these strengths. And this is who I am. So I never checked to see what happened after that, but it was interesting.
Pamela is asking you to repeat what you said about novels.
Yeah, it turns out that the novel was basically created in the 19th century. Well, at the end of the 18th century. And the novel really enabled people to imagine what it was like to be others and to see the world through their eyes. And that, according to Steven Pinker, that was a significant event that helped with empathy. And he believes that decreased violence in the world. Fascinating. So I'd like to think of our work as helping out all that. So I want to talk briefly, and then I want to end with something that I think is important for all of us. I've done there is a lot of research on leaders coaching. It's, again, very hard research to do. But what we do know is when we teach leaders a similar evidence-based coaching, and by the way, this is, you can see Google here. I know that Microsoft is doing this. We have about 15,000 leaders that in British Columbia that use the model that I use for leaders who coach. There are all these things that really seem to be happening. And I'll tell you what the one that is really, really clear is this one, because the research has been clear for decades that if the relationship between your boss and you is good, and if you trust that person, you are much more likely to stay. And you're more likely to be engaged. So whatever, and part of what coaching does for those relationships is it really removes some of the barriers, and people feel understood, and they feel as if they have someone they can go to who really is interested in their well-being and interested in them developing. So it's a huge body of research, and I'm really pleased that it's starting to develop even more. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next poll. And by the way, the reason I started Leaders Who Coach is because I had leaders at the top coming to me and saying, I love this kind of coaching, but we don't do it. We tell people, we don't listen. So, okay, so.
Can you see it, Jen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great.
So here's the question, and I didn't put all the choices up there. I probably have many more choices. As you think about your own practices now, what are you doing to assess your effectiveness as a coach? And you can put several things. Oh, all right, there's a repeat up there.
Sorry about that.
Oh, wasn't me. Okay, that's okay.
Okay, we have about 70%, so we'll allow more time.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and publish it.
Okay.
So a lot of us are asking our clients at the end of the session whether or not they got what they came for. There's lots of ways of asking that. Checking in with stakeholders, partners to measure goal attainment, right? Those are all viable ways for us to do our own research about ourselves. The challenge around asking our clients right after the session is what? Maybe you could put some of your remarks in the chat session. What's some of the challenges of using that? Because I do it, absolutely.
Zora was saying that she didn't relate to any of the choices.
Okay, give me another choice. What? Because I didn't put them all up there. Is there anybody?
I would say that what I do is quite observational in terms of the here and now. Sorry about family sounds behind.
No worries.
And so, you know, I would actually be tracking, of course, specific outcomes that the client has said are important for them. And so how the narrative unfolds of what's going on for them in their lives. And I would also be very keenly paying attention to how they're responding to the coaching itself and how they're interacting with me, and using sort of observations of the kind of language they're using, maybe somatic observation and those kinds of things. So I rely quite strongly on myself because of exactly the issues with asking the client and some of the other ways of assessing as we go through.
Makes sense, Zora. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jen, this goes back, but I missed this question. And the question was, where can we find the content for the retention pie? May I share that with prospective clients?
Well, that chart actually, there's lots and lots of research. If you look at best places to work, I got to see the CEO make a presentation. They've got lots of, there's just so much data on the relationship with the manager. I mean, it's almost, the pie actually came from my partner in forming the coaching association, Dawn Monroe, and she had used that at HP. And so I actually can't give you the actual research. But I think you're also going to find that it changes with generations. But the one thing that doesn't change is the relationship with the immediate manager. For example, they're finding that with millennials, older and younger millennials, especially the younger ones, the fact that whether or not the workplace is inclusive and diverse has become more important. So you're going to find some things that are changing there, but that relationship is gold, I think. And there's ample research on that. I also think that because people don't plan to stay somewhere forever, that they are looking for development. They're looking to develop themselves in an organization because they understand they might be leaving. Well, this is interesting. It's clearly the largest one. Any other comments about how asking your client at the end might be problematic? Maybe you could share in the chat.
Georgia is saying it takes time to sink in.
Yeah. In other words,
Zora is saying asking the client at the end of the session raises several issues. It is likely a happy sheet. They
yes,
might feel all revved up but not follow through.
exactly. Yeah. And there's also that, what we call the man characteristic, where the person feels obliged. Well, I'm paying for this, right? I'm paying you money, so it must be successful, and that's just inherent in any situation like this. And we don't have other measures.
She also added, it interrupts the coaching process and in my view is a bad idea.
Yeah. Better to talk about the goals and what they started off with, I think. Here are just some of the things. I did see some of this in some of the suggestions and articles. Obviously, the goal setting and clarity by the coachee. We've been seeing that in the research. I do use my stakeholders when I'm working with an executive. When there is, and I actually meet with their boss, and not for everybody, but for some of the people. I'm going to start to do kind of a 2-month assessment just to check in with people, not in person, but to do that some kind of simple questionnaire. We'll see how that works. So here's the challenge. I wonder, this is what I'm wondering, as a coaching association, would it be at all fruitful for us to form a committee that actually does a little bit of research in this and comes up with some different models and some different suggestions for how we can do this? I have to say, I've asked a couple of very high-level master certified coaches about this, and they've never seen any research on this in terms or any real concrete suggestions on how to do this. So I just thought it might be something that we as a coaching association might want to tackle. Be interesting. So what do people think about that? Who's our next president?
Todd.
Todd. What do you think, Todd?
Interesting idea. Because you talked about different aspects here today, what specifically would you want the research to focus on?
Well, it's not so much research as it's what we can do as practitioners. What are some options for us? And I don't, the idea is, as an association, we're here to further best practices. So wouldn't it be neat to have people contribute to what they're doing, like Zora was talking about? That's a different kind of checking in, but to really help people understand that there are some possibilities for measuring our effectiveness. And nothing's perfect, but what are some of the ideas? So it's less about research and more about let's go out there and do some research on best practices. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the hardcore stuff. Oh, that's an interesting idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that idea. I do. I think that it would be interesting of how, implementing something like that and saying, hey, this is what we're finding, especially because it is regional focused, of what we're doing in our region, in our area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other thoughts about that?
Yes. We had a comment from Zora, and she's saying coaching results are overdetermined and it's difficult to be sure of causation, if not impossible. Jack Phillips is probably doing something like this in all of his ROI work.
Thank you for that referral. Yeah.
I
It
just
is-
want to clarify,
Yeah.
those are two completely separate comments because Jack Phillips's work, I find problematic exactly because of that, because
I
efficacy research is overdetermined. So I don't try to do it because I don't believe it can
Right.
be done in that kind of a way.
I think Zora is bringing up a really important point that no matter what we do, we can't be assured that that's necessarily telling us that we're doing a great job. I mean, let's just be honest about it. But could we do something that really is about getting feedback from the client and finding a way to observe that we can keep a check on ourselves? And I just find it's an interesting problem. Well, I know we're at the end of our time, and anything you want to say?
I just want to say I put in the chat a link to our feedback survey, and we need that for your CEUs and also to let us know how we're doing. And thank you so much, Jan. This was wonderful. I learned so much, and I can't wait to get the recording where I can go through it again. So thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. I have to say I didn't know a lot when I started this, so it was neat for me to learn too. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Just have a follow-up conversation as well to see how we could move some of that best practices forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to be part of that, Todd.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and join us next month, please, as we are working with Krista Martin. She's our presenter, the six-figure coach, the fast path to more clients, profit, and impact.
And thank you, Zora, for joining us all the way from England.
Yes.
Thank you. It was lovely.